1714, the town of Aberystwyth in Wales. A man named Griffith Owen is born in a nearby village. His father was a sailor, and sailing would be the only education Griffith would ever receive. According to the author of his story, Mabaidd Tywi, God hadn't given Griffith the gift of wealth, but of courage and determination, two gifts that would very much come in handy in the near future. Griffith sailed for most of his life, and when he was 18, he took part in a voyage from Jamaica to France, accompanied by his father, Diwedd. Most of the passengers seem to have been ordinary, except for one family, a wealthy Scottish merchant, his wife, and their kid, but they themselves weren't notable. What happened to them was. According to the author, at some point along the voyage, the kid ran away from their parents, and somehow, in the confusion, tripped over a table on the deck of the ship, and flew overboard. Diwedd immediately spotted this, and dove in after them. Diving into the open sea isn't the safest activity you can do, especially on a ship that can't turn around very quickly, or easily, but Diwedd on this day would be particularly unlucky. After grabbing the kid and beginning to swim back to the ship, he spotted something. A shape in the water approaching him. He might not have known this particular species very well, but both he and his son Griffith knew others like it. In Welsh it was a morgy, a sea dog, a shark. Wales and the UK in general isn't exactly famous for its sharks, but species do live in these waters, and as I just mentioned, the Welsh call them sea dogs, morgy. We have sun sea dogs, blue sea dogs, sea foxes, little-headed sea dogs, and sea dwarf dogs. The last of those is actually briefly hypothesized to be its own species, known as the Beaumaris shark in English. The point I want to make here is that Diwedd and Griffith, as lifelong sailors, will have known what a shark was, but their experience with them would have been very different. We have records from 1748 of complaints about these Welsh sharks being a nuisance to fishermen's nets, and one particular story from 1904 describes a man from Swansea trying to fight one with a pole. Until they began sailing from the Caribbean, neither of these men likely ever encountered anything much more dangerous than this. But now, here Diwedd was, in the water, with an apparently aggressive morgy rapidly approaching. This is also a remarkably unlucky situation. The Florida Museum of Natural History lists only 3 shark species with unprovoked attacks in the triple digits: bull, tiger, and great white sharks. And this particular animal approaching Diwedd could have been any one of these. And as for why it was so close to the ship as to immediately appear in the water, well, it could just be a coincidence, but I found one possible explanation. Robert G. Williams, in his autobiography, Thrilling Experience of the Welsh Evangelist R.G. Williams, Reformed Drunker and Gambler, or 48 Years in Darkness and Sin and 11 Years in the Light and Love of Christ Jesus, the best possible title any book has ever had, mentioned something quite gruesome early on. 10 days into his voyage from Wales to America, a passenger had died of smallpox on board. The body was consequently buried at sea, an event that would almost certainly have happened several times on a voyage like this, and unfortunately doesn't happen anymore on today's modern sanitized cruises. And then, after a few days, Robert spots a group of sharks following the vessel, which he very explicitly believed were waiting for more bodies to be buried overboard. Sailing across the Atlantic in the 1700s would have almost certainly led to a few deaths, and because of this, a shark could have already been following Griffith's vessel, like Robert's, waiting for someone to fall in, dead, or in this unfortunate case, alive. No one immediately did anything to help Diwedd. The sight of the shark in the waters had frightened them all. Some sailors apparently tried shooting at it, although were told that this was ineffective. Griffith, however, was different. Upon seeing the danger that his father was in, he did, in the words of Mabaidd, what men much stronger than him were afraid to do. He grabbed a sword, and he jumped in. The word the author used for this blade was auchus, sharp, but also zealous, ardent, or vehement. Griffith shared the qualities of the weapon he picked up, and he was about to demonstrate that. The shark doesn't seem to have paid attention to him, as we're told he was able to maneuver and swim under it. And in a brave attempt to save his father's life, he swam forwards and pushed the sword into the animal. The people on the ship stood watching in fear, as the shark abandoned its previous targets, turning to Griffith. Mabaidd calls him a gwron, a warrior, an adjective once reserved for the kings and princes of Wales, as he continued to prove that he deserved it. Griffith got in another strike, before the horrifying realization that he was, quite literally, out of his element. The animal he was facing had 450 million years in evolutionary training, and Griffith had a sharp object. The water stopped him from being strong enough to deal the fatal blow, but it wasn't going to stop the shark from doing the same. In the meantime, the people on board had thrown out ropes, but the waves and the panic had made this escape more difficult. Diwedd and the kid eventually managed to reach the ship, and Griffith wasn't far behind. He clung onto the rope and both men were out of the water. As the author says, their salvation seemed certain. But in pain, and apparently still hungry, the shark continued to approach the ship despite his injuries, and while Diwedd and Griffith were above the waves, this wouldn't deter the animal. Mabaidd seems to have believed that the shark possessed some kind of sentience or malice. The word they used was synhwylrodeb, not some kind of natural instinct, but genuine wisdom or intelligence. They then tell us that, as the curtain should have been closing on this horrifying close call, the shark emerged from the water, jumping upwards, and bit Griffith in half. Diwedd made it onto the ship. Thanks to Griffith, the rescue had been successful, but it was at the cost of his life. We aren't told any more about Diwedd, or what happened after this. The author gives us only one more sentence, noting that this was Griffith's Diwedd, a Welsh word meaning conclusion, or death, fitting for the end of both Griffith's life and of the story. Mabaidd touts him as a wondrous example to the youth of Wales, with a remarkable display of bravery and Cariad Mabaidd, son's love, which they also used as the title. And then, it ends. Both Diwedd and Griffith got remarkably unlucky on this day. Diwedd like he wasn't expecting a shark, let alone one to show up so quickly and to be so aggressive. Griffith, however, seemed unaffected by this, and still chose to lay down his life. There's no doubt something scary about an apex predator. Our ancestors' equivalents of true crime podcasts would have likely been passing down legends of brutal, man-eating animals, but relatively speaking, this was a rare event. I don't want anyone to come away from this video with the notion that sharks are horrifying beasts of the deep. Rather, those species that are apex predators should just be thought of as such. Mabaidd, the author, was wrong to attribute any sort of synhwylrodeb, intelligence or wisdom to this animal. Still though, you can see why a Welshman, raised with stories of fishermen pulling irritating, slippery sea dogs out of nets, would have been pretty astounded to encounter something as fearsome as this. There's no wonder why the Welsh soon coined the uncommon name sea wolves. Griffith didn't jump in the water facing a dogfish. He didn't lose his life to the same species that fishermen would try to fight from their nets with poles. As a lifelong shark lover, my first encounter with a great white was in an encyclopedia. I cannot imagine what it must have felt like to have seen one of these bigger sharks for the first time, let alone to jump straight into the water with one, armed with nothing but a sword, trading your life for someone else's. This was the story of Griffith, one that was entirely forgotten from history. Its author, Mabaidd Tywi, seems to have only ever written twice. I found their work buried deep in a Welsh language periodical called Iforydd from 1842, lost between articles on historiography, King Arthur, and marriage rights in Brittany, in an attempt to research for an entirely different topic. This was actually originally envisioned as a video covering the history of what the Welsh thought of sea dogs, of sharks, but I couldn't find anything prior to the 1600s. Eventually though, I stumbled on Griffith's story, and that brought you this short video because it isn't just an interesting Welsh story, but it's one that I think deserves to be told. A story of courage, of bravery, Cariad Mabaidd, and Morgi. Not one that deserves to be lost in the middle of an obscure periodical from nearly 200 years ago. Thank you for watching, and thank you to the National Library of Wales for digitising this story.